I just have a few more top operators I want to show you because tops are, core to any project, visual project. Another commonly used top is called the select top. And let's just find that, type in select. Select. Now the select top is very simple. All it does is just grab another top from another area. So when we have very huge networks and a lot of a big project, you'll need to sometimes grab something from another location, and that's where you use a select top. I want to use it here just to grab the movie from above. Of course, I could have wired it down here to something, but sometimes wires, when you have lots of them, it'll make your network a little hard to read or a little hard to understand. It turns into a bit of a mess. So I'm going to use a select top down here, and I'm going to, for the parameter here, I'm just going to drag the movie file into it. And basically what that's done is it's allowed me to not have to wire it in directly. It's just grabbing it. And there's no cost to this operation, so you could grab it and put it in any network you want. It's actually not using a wire, it's just making a reference through the parameter. So I'm going to add now a blur top to this by right-clicking on the output and selecting blur. So again, the reason I did this was so I didn't have a wire coming all the way down my network like this, and I have all this, now it's crossing over other networks and making it hard to see. I don't like that. So I used a select, and I just have this little dotted line. And one of the nice things about the dotted lines is if you want to turn them off, there's a keyboard shortcut for that. It's X, so you can clean up your network if you're just trying to see where your things are. And then if you want to see all your references again, you can turn them back on with X. So just a little network management. So I'm going to zoom in here. The blur top is just a filter that does blurring. The filter size is how blurry it is. And just because a parameter goes up to a certain number doesn't mean you can't overdrive it. So I could put in a higher number here, like 50, or I can keep on going, and you can keep overdriving it past the number that the slider does. So always feel free to try that. You can use, let's say I want to show you a cross top now. So if we do a cross top, C-R-O-S-S, cross top. Now I moved this blur up a little bit because I want to now take the non-blurred image and put it into the second input of the cross top. So I've made a little network here where it blurs on the one side, and then on the other side it's straight through. And the cross top is basically like a crossfader of allowing us to select which one we want.
Does it matter if it doesn't?
Well, if I go to 0, it's using the first input. All TouchDesigner numbering is 0 based, so 0 is the first input, and if I go to 1, it's the second input. So if I switch them around, if I select this, and here's a quick way of switching it. Now it's the opposite. The crosstop is really nice way to fade in and out effects. So I have an effect that's blurred here, that's fully in, and if I want to fade it out, I can use this to control that. For example, if I add another crosstop to this, a crosstop again, and I use a constant top down here, second constant. I make this black. See, this time the input does matter, which side is which. And now I have a fade to black. All right, so you can, the crosstop is great, great way of like fading in and out certain effects. Yeah. So you'll see I have two inputs here, and sometimes you want to switch them. And instead of disconnecting them all and reconnecting them, you can click on one of them and go and click on it makes a little S shape, and it'll switch the inputs for you. So basically you're just taking one to the other. And now I have a fade to black sort of effect and a fade in and out my cross effect, or my blur effect. I can put this up here and up like this. Now I want to show you another nice blur top we have. If I just press tab and open it, it's called Luma Blur. So Luma, and it's down in the second column at the bottom almost. And I'll put the movie, or this from the select, I'll put the unaltered image right into the blur. And what this blur wants is it wants a ramp, a black and white ramp, to tell you where it's going to be blurred. So if we use, let's use a ramp top like we were playing with earlier. Ramp. And black and white is fine. We'll just plug it in. So we basically have this set up. And then if we go to the parameters of the Luma Blur and we crank up the white filter width to make it 50 or 70 or something high. So what this is doing is where it's black, it's giving us a blur of 1, and where it's white, it's giving us a blur of 70. So you'll see the bottom of this image is not very blurred at all, and the top is very blurred. So I can change this ramp to maybe a circular to get a better idea. Yeah. And now I'll make the black in the middle bigger. So now I have like a little bit of a fuzz on the outside. It's sort of like a cheap fake depth of field. Definitely not real depth of field, but you have a blur on the outside and a nice crisp image in the middle. Yeah, so because it's kind of like the null top that I showed you earlier, it's an instance. It uses 0 megabytes. It's just making it's just letting you view something else in memory. So you're not wasting any resources using it.
How do you preview this?
This is middle mouse click. So you can do that on any operator. No, your middle mouse is not working? Okay, there's another way of...
No, I mean like this picture. Yeah.
Oh.
What it actually looks like.
There's a display flag on the tops, and you can turn on that. Yeah. Sorry. That did remind me of something. If you do want to see the middle mouse button and you're stuck somewhere without a middle mouse button, you can go up to the parameters and there's a an information button, an I, and you left click on it and it'll give you the same window. I showed you the cross, but there's another operator similar to the cross called the switch, which we use a lot of the time. So I'm going to go back up to the ramps for this. And let's find switch. It's down in the 4th column at the bottom. And this, instead of just having 2 inputs like the cross, it has multiple inputs. See, multi-input op. So I'm going to take my first ramp, the very first one. And then I'm going to take the composited one. And then I'm going to take the last one, or the second ramp. There. So I'm using all 3 of my my ramps from before. And now the index parameter allows you to switch between those inputs. It just automatically, if I go to 1, it'll go to the second input, and if I go to 2, it'll go to the third input. But what's nice about this is that you can turn on blend between inputs, and it'll act now like a crosstalk. It will fade between the two. So I can go from this and fade into my composited and then fade out into my second input and go through them like this. So, and you can add as many inputs as you can conceive here. So you could do this for a while. So often we'll do, without the blending, we often do a switch to, let's say you have two movies and you want to all of a sudden jump to the second one. You can just set this parameter. Maybe it's a button, maybe it's an input device, a MIDI device, something like that, and it'll just switch it to the second one. And it's like instant. And that's the way we switch stuff.
But how do you control this index? Let's say the first one is on 1, the second one is on 2.
So I would usually use it in a chop channel. So let's I'm going to turn on blending because I actually want to fade like this. Okay. And what we could do is go chop, mouse in. Okay, so the switch, when you're doing this cutting between different inputs, I'll show this, I'll turn off these. Notice that this isn't cooking anymore, this isn't active, it's only using the one input. So it's actually not calculating this component here. If I go to number 1, now it's calculating that one. So it's automatically optimizing, but only using the one it needs. So that's something the switch does that the cross doesn't. Basically, as soon as it's above 0, it'll start, if you have blend between inputs, it starts using a bit of the second one. And 1.0 will be just the second one. And then 1.1 will be 10% of the next one. You can't limit this parameter, but you can limit whatever's driving it.
Yeah.
So, for example, I have this mouse right now that is showing me my X and my Y, right? So I'm just gonna go to the mouse and remove the Y. I don't care about TY, position Y. So it's just X, and it's -1 to 1, depending on where my mouse is on the monitor, right? But you were saying so we'll limit it. So we'll do a couple things. First, I want to get it from 0 to 2 because I have 0, 1, 2, right? So I want 0 to 2. So if I add a math chop here, math, and then in the from range, instead of 0 to 1, I go -1 to 1. And in the 2 range, 0 to 2. So what it's saying is the input is -1 to +1. So -1 to +1. Now make this range instead 0 to 2. See, 0 to 2. But you could limit it further to your question about limiting.
Yeah.
There is exactly that called a limit chop. So I put a limit chop there. And under the type of limit, I'm going to say clamp, and I'm going to say 0 to 2. Now, no matter what that number is on the input, it will not go past 2. It'll stay in between 0 and 2 all the time. Now, I want to get this value into this this parameter here, and like we did this earlier this morning, we'll export a chop to do that. So again, we always want to use a null chop to export from. So I'm going to right-click on this and find a null chop. And I'm not going to rename it just because I'm lazy right now. But I will right-click and make it a floating window. I like doing it this way. It's a little easier to manage. So here's my channel, and I'll select the switch top, so I'm looking at this parameter. Yeah, there it is. And I'll drag and drop it onto that parameter and select export chop. So now my mouse on the screen is doing the crossfading or the switching for me. So I will show you another way to export because we haven't used the viewers too much, but I've been asking you to open the viewer by right-clicking on the null chop and saying View. The other way you can access this viewer is through this viewer active flag. This viewer active flag will allow this viewer to become interactive. So I can do that. It's the same as opening it and interacting with it like this, but it's right in the middle of the network. And I can drag this out and do the same. Now, the reason I didn't get you to do that is it's a couple extra steps, and also when you're in this viewer active mode, you can no longer move this operator. You can't move the node around. It's no longer draggable like this. So it sometimes gets people a little sideways. So you need to, again, turn it off until you see the green outline before you can move the node around. Okay. But what you're actually doing is when you're activating the viewer, you're now interacting with the data inside it. So if I was to try that on a top, let's see what happens. If I try that on a top to activate the viewer, now the viewer is active. I can interact with it, and I can zoom in. I can inspect it. Doesn't make much sense to inspect a ramp, but perhaps, and I can press H to home it. Perhaps it makes more sense to inspect, a movie. If I want to go in and inspect this pixel and see what's going on with this image, I can do that. But now again, I can't move the operator. I can, like this, I can move. I can't move this around. You could drag this this name. That'll let you move it, but you have to turn that off, and then you can move it. Now I'll press home to home that. If you ever are in tops and you've zoomed in and you want to get back to normal, you can press H to home it. And the other thing you can do is you can right-click in any viewer and see what the options are. So there's home, which I just showed you. There's also display pixel values. So this is very handy. It shows you the RGB value and your position. So if I want to see the color of this star here, I can mouse over it and get the color of the star, and then use that somewhere else for whatever you need to use it for. We also have a field guide for, let me home this, a field guide for title safe and region safe guides for those of you shooting cinematography stuff. Also, we have the ability to look at individual color channels of the image. So if I want to look at just the red channel, I can select red here, and that's the red channel. Blue channel, alpha channel, which is all white right now, and back to color. C is for color. So, and these are the shortcuts for those operations. Okay. So you'll use viewer active very often, but remember when you're interacting with a node and it's doing stuff that's not expected, to turn it off if you're trying to move it or if you're trying to use the flags. I usually like, personally, this is just my way of working, is opening a node and then turning it off right away so it's back to normal. So the keyboard shortcut for that is A for active. Just a little side note. And you can export the chop from there like this, blah, blah, blah. So if you actually want to disconnect it, you have to break the connection between these operators, or you can hide it. You can hide the by pressing X. So that's just hiding the display.
But it's still going on.
Yeah, it's still going on.
Want to disconnect.
So if I would want to disconnect, I would see where this is going, and it's going to switch 1 parameter index, right? So I go to the switch 1, and I say the parameter index, and I right-click on it, and down here there's an option for remove export. Okay, then I can remove it, and now there's no control. So anyways, a couple more tops that you need to know about. The noise top. This is just to generate noise. Say NVIDIA and AMD are fine with these, but the Intel GPU is not always able to run them. But these are, yeah, here's all your parameters for your noise, you know, your period, your amplitude, all these other things you can control the noise to look with. And then on the transform page, you also have options of moving this noise through the noise space. So you can transform it in X and Y, or sorry, X and Y. And Z is actually, if you have a 3D noise, it's going through the noise in the Z, which is the third dimension. So this is a really nice way of animating noise, is using this TZ parameter at a very slow rate. I can show you how to do that with a very short little Python thing, abs time dot seconds. This just means absolute time. Get the seconds of the absolute time, and you have an animated noise. That's a bit too fast, so I'm going to divide it by 5 and get this. And you have beautiful, beautiful noise.
How did we develop this thing?
So I will go into Translate, and I open it up, just because I want more space to type, and I go to TZ, and then I just type in this Python expression, which is ABS capital T for on time dot seconds.
But without the expressions, can you animate it?
I could also use a chop. So remember, we have some chops up here, right? So remember this one. I'll make the viewer open on this chop down here, and I'll put it here, and I'll drag it to there and say export. And now I'm controlling it with my mouse left and right. Okay, so now that I have both of these set up, I'm going to go back to the expression to show you that. So I can click on the blue box and go back to the expression that I wrote. If I want to use an external editor to edit this, maybe it's a very long expression instead of this little field, you can right-click on it and say Edit Parameter. And it opens in whatever text editor you have. We have Sublime installed here, but it could be Notepad or Notepad++ or whatever. And I can change this to whatever I want and save it, and it updates. Control save, file, save. There. Now I'm using Sublime text editor, which we really like, but you can use whatever you want as far as your external text editor, and that's available to be set in preferences. So edit preferences, and then if I go to the DATS page here, it says you can select your text editor and your table editors here. Okay, another top is video device in top. This basically gives you any webcam you have on your, there we go. So you can get your webcam, or you can also, if you have a capture card. So all of these we support native SDKs for, Imaging Source, DataPath, Blackmagic, Allied Vision, Point Grey. And a lot of these have been added based on customer requests. So if you are working with a certain type of camera or capture card, you can contact us, and we'd be interested in talking to you about integrating it. All right, and then another one is a Photoshop in. If you're working with artists or illustrators, you can have Photoshop running on this computer or another computer, and whichever is the active document they're working on or painting on, they will get the image here in TouchDesigner. So we've used this in live coloring and shading sessions where the artist is actually painting in, we're projecting on some object, and the artist is painting in shadows and painting in color to make it, just to make it look right, and they don't have to. They can paint in Photoshop, which is their tool of choice. The other, if you know what Connect is, the Connect sensor, we have a Connect Touch top, which brings in all the sensor data, whether it's depth, infrared, point cloud. It still works with the original Connect or version 2. So you would just lay this down and have your Connect connected with the SDK installed, and you instantly get your Connect data right here. And two more really basic, super basic, I'm going to go back to the easy stuff now, is the circle and the rectangle tops, which are some of the newest tops. We went a long time before going back to simple. But this is just for basically making texture shapes and for building UIs and interfaces and play around with the colors and the borders and anything like that. So don't forget about those guys.
For the Photoshop in, do you need to do anything in Photoshop to get like on the other end?
There's a setup, but it's all documented here. And it's called Remote Connections under the Edit menu in Photoshop, and then you set up the name of the server and password. It'll give you the IP address, and then you put that information into here. There's a password, IP,